We've talked about it before, but I got to tell you, I think one of the most sacred things God gives us is friendship. And you learn quickly who your friends are when things go bad, right? I've always said, like, as a city, we know who our friends are when a hurricane hits, right? Because those people are moving towards us. You know who your friends are when you go through a divorce, when you go through a bankruptcy, when you lose your job. When you're not in an emotionally great space and people still move towards you and say, like, hey, I'm with you. If you're on the street, I'll take your hand. If you're hungry, I'll give you food. If it's money you need, I've got some saved. If you're sick, I'll visit you. Friendship is a covenant. We move towards people and we say, hey, listen, I'm going to take care of you, and I know one day you're going to be the one taking care of me, and we can't get through this life all on our own. But the truth is, and the Surgeon General released a warning, a report, like, was that last year or the year before? Sam, do you remember? They released a report that loneliness was now at pandemic rates, that people were so lonely and alone. And I think many of us, particularly men, struggle to admit loneliness. It feels like a failure. But this is what I'd tell you. In the Bible, loneliness is more of a signal. It's a reminder, like, hey, something's off. Because guess what? To have a real friend, right, it takes work. It takes hours. It takes commitment to live into that kind of friendship. In Genesis chapter 2, right at the beginning of the story, God speaks, right? And he's created perfection, mankind, the garden and beauty, but he looks and just says, it's not good for the man to be alone. I'm going to create a companion, a perfectly suited partner, right? And many of us have lived long enough to know that marriage is not the only relationship that we're made for. Some of us aren't intended to be married. That's not how but we thrive in relationship. We thrive with friendships. And we have to learn, what does it look like to invest those? There are probably a lot of men in the room that have read. There's a book that I've been reading that I love. A guy named Scott Galloway wrote a book called Notes on Being a Man. And it was really helpful just because so much of what you read about being a man is often really toxic and unhealthy. And one of the things he points out is that there is what many would describe as a friendship crisis, particularly among men. We see it perfectly at Ecclesia. And our church is probably it's an ideal example. You'll notice the women, they get together constantly. They are constantly being socially and engaged. They don't do a women's retreat once a year. They do it twice a year, right? And they got a group of women that get together. They plan it. They do it all. They're not even staff. Mitzi kind of helps guide and push, but they literally just they come together, they organize, and they get together and they do yoga and they talk to each other and they look at one another in the eyes. And guys, we do the opposite. We just kind of keep moving. Scott Galloway says it this way. He says, men don't have a friendship problem. They have a vulnerability problem. Because to be a friend requires some vulnerability, right? We laugh at it. Well, it's easier for me to laugh at it because it's hard sometimes to face. But this comedian, Brian Regan, breaks it down pretty well in this comedy special that he did. And it's a perfect example of what we as men often, it's only funny because it's real, right? And many of our sisters, they're just really prone to this kind of intimate talk. And sometimes some of us, especially men, are not so much. But the truth is, we're made for it. We need it. We need lifelong friends. We find comfort, right? In John 15, I read it to you a few weeks ago in this series, right? That Jesus turns and says, I don't call you servants any longer. Servants don't know what the master's doing, but I've told you everything the Father has said to me. I call you friends. And the truth is, God made us to be in friendship and relationship with God and with each other. C.S. Lewis says it this way. He says, friendship has no survival value rather than it is one of those things that gives value to survival. Sometimes, particularly for men, we're like, we got a goal. We need to, we're going to get in great shape. We're going to professionally advance. We're going to do this, this, or this. And if a friendship doesn't fit in that, then it doesn't really work. And friendships take time and hours. And often, by the way, it's kind of like the thing that many of us are like, I got married so I wouldn't have to date and be rejected anymore. And to have friends means you got to be able to say, like, you want to do a happy hour? Like, do you want to meet up? Like, when can we get together? and it's challenging. Sometimes it's hard. Proverbs 17:17 tells us that it tells us a true friend loves regardless of the situation. And a real brother, sister, exists to share the tough times. Anybody have a friend that you give thanks for a friend like that? That literally you went through a hard time and there you go, I was born for this day. I was born to be with you through this. And if you got a friend like that, you are blessed. But the truth is, all of us, almost all of us would say, we desperately need more. Now, we got to this place and I realized like for women, it's really easy. Like I can tell you like, hey, show up at the next women's event. You're probably having one tomorrow. You have them all the time, right? So for the men, I decided to do a spontaneous event on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we're going to gather at the West Side. And literally, this is the extent of the planning. I'm going to light the fire pit. That's the extent of the planning. I'm going to light the fire pit. And if you want to show up, you can bring a cigar. You can bring what you want to drink. And we're going to actually try to ask questions that go a little bit deeper. Because this is the truth, right? One of the blessings that we learn from Fred Rogers. So just put that down, 6:30 West Side. Really easy. Bring whatever you want. One of the truths we learned from Fred Rogers is that he moved towards presence, right? It was about learning a holy attention. And this is part of what we want to do. We want to learn to have that kind of holy, sacred attention that when you sit with someone, you actually feel like they're present with you and that you're talking about more than just what's in passing. Now, for guys, we're pros at this. We can talk about sports, news, weather, work, and really never get very far. Fred had a few favorite questions, right? He would ask people things like, what's been difficult lately? Isn't it interesting how different that is than how are you doing? How are you doing? Like, it's almost asking like what your parents would ask you when you would get hurt, right? They would ask you, where does it hurt? Like, tell me where it hurts. Can you imagine getting together with friends, just saying like, can you tell me where does it hurt right now? And having some real, true, and engaging conversations. Now, here's the cool part in this series. I wasn't going to do a series, a message on friendship. Fred Rogers has so much stuff we can talk about. But a few weeks ago, I had a new friend, send me a book that he wrote about his friendship with Fred Rogers. This guy, Tim Madigan, he's a journalist in Fort Worth. And years ago, he did an interview on Fred Rogers, and they hit it off. They became real friends, like the kind of friends that when there was a death in the family or someone that they loved, Fred, you may know, was really close to an influence by one of our favorite spiritual writers, Henry Nouwen. In fact, when Henry Nouwen died, one of the first people he called was his new friend, Tim. And he talked to him about this hard time and life. And I get the book, and I got to tell you, it's just been one of my favorite books. It's called I'm Proud of You. And because I'll tell you more of the story, but it was one of the things that Fred said to my friend Tim that was really meaningful. And in the book, there's just all this beautiful content about their friendship and the things that Fred taught about friendship. One of my favorites is this proverb that Fred sent in a letter to Tim. This is what it's an Arabian proverb. And he says this, he says, a friend is one to whom one may pour out all the contents of one's heart, chaff and grain together, knowing that the gentlest of hands will take and sift it, keep what's worth keeping, and with a breath of kindness, blow the rest away. That's what friendship is, or really ought to be. Fred explains it this way in another quote in the letters. He says, a friend, my favorite thing that he would say to Tim, right, or Tim said about Fred Rogers, right, is that nothing I said would scare him away. I could tell him anything. That's what real friendship looks like. Fred explained that a friend is more than a therapist or a confessor. A friend is that other person with whom we can share our solitude, our silence, and our prayer. With a friend, we can be still and know that God is there with both of us. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says that friendship is born at the moment when one person says to another, "What, you too? I thought I was the only one." Anybody remember having a moment like that with a friend where you just go like, wow, we're not alone in this. We're actually in it together. I had this deep feeling like that I wanted to do what I've tried to do before, and I wanted all of you to read I'm Proud of You. And I was like, I'm just going to order a bunch of copies, and I still need to order a bunch of copies. But I thought, if most of you tend to ignore it when I give you homework, you don't do any of it. And in fact, it's kind of like my kids. You're like, I'll show you. I'll never read that book. And so I'm like, that may not work. So I decided instead, like, if you wanted to get a glimpse into this beautiful friendship that really captivated me, that the best thing that could happen would be for you to meet Tim. So I want to ask you to welcome my new friend, Fred Rogers' friend, Tim Madigan. Tim's with us today, and I've asked Tim to come up and just share. Tim and I have a common friend that was a member of my church in Waco. And Jennifer, my friend, sent Tim the very first sermon in this series. And Tim sent me the book with a really, really kind note. And then instantly I was captivated by the book. And the book is titled, I'm Proud of You. And it won't take you long getting into the book to reach what feels to me, Tim, like the climax of the book, because it's a moment that you engaged of like extreme vulnerability. Would you tell that story of how that came about? You can set it up in any way you want.
Thanks, Chris. I'm covered over right now by you. Right?
Yeah.
One of Fred's favorite things to do in life is to make connections between people. And somewhere in heaven, he's really smiling because Chris is stuck with me now. I'm afraid. And to make, I spent a lot of time this morning just looking around at you. And what do I see? Huh? You know what I see? I see the world. And my heart sings. The story to which Chris refers is, I met him through an assignment. We became friends, but there's a real risk becoming a friend of Fred Rogers because he wanted to know what's the hard stuff. He wanted to know about what he called your essential invisibles. Every person's got them. He quoted Henry Now and said, what is most personal is most universal. And what is most personal is not the things we're proud of, it's the things we most try to conceal from one another.
Yeah.
And Henry said, Henry and Fred said, those are what we have most in common, the hard stuff. So share. He had a unashamed insistence on intimacy, according to Tom Juneau, the writer, and he would very gently but very persistently try to dig out your essential invisible. So after knowing him for 6 months and corresponding with him for 6 months in a very guy way, I wrote him a very different kind of letter, and I said, Dear Fred, you don't want to know about my essential invisibles? What is it about me that doesn't meet the eye? Well, here goes. So I told him about years of what I recognize now as life-threatening depression and pathologically low self-esteem and problems in my marriage and and I was winning a lot of journalism awards at the time. And if you'd look at me from the outside, you'd say, man, that dude's got it going on. On the inside, I was dying. We're all such great actors, right? Anyway, so in this letter I said, at the heart of everything, Fred, is this haunting notion that all of my life I've tried to get my father to be proud of me. And for whatever reason, I've never felt like I've succeeded. Try to be a good athlete, try to be a good student, try to be a good person, try to blah, 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 blah. And it's never seemed to work. So in this letter, I said, you seem different. I don't have to do anything. So I have a question to ask you. Would you be proud of me? And for whatever reason, I folded it up, licked a stamp, put an envelope, and mailed it away. And what in the world was I thinking? Who does that? Who does that? Really? What a weird, weird thing to do. However, had I not, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I might not be alive. You know, when we can take off our masks and take our loneliness to another person we can trust. Guys, are you paying attention? It's hard, yeah, right?
Yeah.
But it's courageous. We all suffer, and women have permission.
Yeah.
Fred replies, "Dear Tim, the answer to your question is yes, an exclamation point. Capital letters, a resounding yes, I am proud of you. I will be proud of you. I have been proud of you since first we met." He said, "There's nothing you could tell me that would change my yes for you. Please remember that." And he said, "I'm deeply grateful that you would care to share so much of yourself with me and look forward to hearing all that you would care to share in the future." Another time he told me, "Your trust confirms my trustworthiness." Is that when you can take off that mask and you can lean into another person and say, "You know what, I don't know what it looks like, but I am really hurting today." You're paying that other person one of the highest compliments one human being can pay to another, which is to say, "I trust you." And then the real friendship went on. He was with me through the death of a brother. He was with me through ongoing problems in my marriage. One time I told him I was getting ready to leave my wife. I didn't, and we're still married and happily ever after. But I wrote him a letter and told him that, and I said, "Could you be proud of a person like that?" And you know what he said? He said, "Please know that I would never forsake you. That I would never stop loving you, that I'll always be proud of you. Those who care about you are privileged to share your pain."
Yeah.
This is friendship. At a somewhat exalted level, I realize. But it's pointing us in the direction of coming out of our isolation, coming out of the shadows, and frankly, joining the human race that I see all around me today. So God bless you all. God bless Chris. This place and places like that will be the foundation and the solution for our world.
Amen.
So what you do here and what you pray here and what you sing here is way more important than you might think, because our world needs you. Our world needs this. And my heart is so full to be here with you this morning. God bless you all.
Can I ask you one more question? Part of, in the book, part of what comes through, right, is that, Lady Gaga's singing Fred's song this week, right? Apparently for a Super Bowl commercial, but still. I hope Fred's family's getting some money from it. The thing is, like, when it comes to fame and TV, right? There's like, my wife. Well, I don't know what she would say, but I will never be as handsome as Brad Pitt, right? I will just I'm never gonna be like. I'm just my best day, right? I'm just still gonna cover this ugly face with a lot of hair, and there's the famous people, like, we just go like, well, they live a different life than me. They're just different. Like, I'll never be that. I'm not going to be that. Fred was famous because of his kindness, something that all of us could be. Like, we all have access to this. Like, when you were with Fred, and what was it about the way that he engaged people that you'd go like, that all of us could do that we would want to learn from Fred?
You have great inner beauty.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the way you have a great personality.
Okay. Very simply, this is a superpower. What can we do? First time I talked to him on the telephone, interviewing him for my initial story, we talked for an hour. And towards the end of the hour, he said to me, Tim, do you know what the most important thing in my life is right now? And I said, well, Mr. Rogers, we just met. How could I possibly know that? And he said, it's talking to Mr. Tim Madigan on the telephone. And that exchange kind of encapsulated his superpower, which was to be present. I think presence is coming up today, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And he lived in presence. But presence means no preoccupations, no agendas, no distractions, no ego. When you're speaking to him, he's taken without any filter. It's going into the sacred place inside of him, and then he responds from that place. So put simply, what can we do? Be present to one another.
Yeah.
Turn your brain off. And I do it better now because of my experience here, but still very imperfectly. And I need to think about being present. I need to think about turning my brain off. But that is the thing. Be present. And a lot of times when you're present, you don't need to say a word. Just the gift of that presence is enough. And that was his superpower. He was so evolved spiritually that he had the courage and he had the wisdom and he had the inner wherewithal to be so quiet inside that when he was with you and you alone.
If we learned that, right, the world would be a radically different place. I obviously have because I love the book and I'm going to share it with you. We're going to get some copies and you can order it as well. But one of the things Fred would do on almost every email exchange after that is he would just write IPOY, right? I'm proud of you. And I don't know about you, but I would love for that to be a part of our vocabulary around here. Just to tell people on a regular basis, like, hey, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you are. I'm proud of what you do. I'm proud of the way that you treat people. I'm proud of you despite your failures and your flaws, because I see what God made in you and what he has for you. So I obviously have 50 more questions I would love to share with you that Tim and so I'm going to try to beg him to do a podcast with me and we'll send it out to you and extend the conversation. Would you guys thank Tim for joining us today? Isn't it beautiful how the world works? How you just enter one door and God opens another and he brings us through and he invites us into the kind of friendships that we're made for. There are a few things that you can do over the coming weeks to help make some more of those friends. One of the things that we believe at Ecclesia is that our church and your relationships would be even stronger if you could connect with some people that worship together, that are a part of the same mission, that believe God's called us to do something in the brokenness of this world, but that actually live close enough to us that we could share dinner on a regular basis. And so next Sunday after the service, we're having what we call a neighborhood mixer. And part of what this means is people smarter than me have already organized a plan to point you in a number of directions where you can gather with people that live reasonably close to you in the city. And just to meet some people. And my encouragement to you, whether it's at that event or whether you decide to come sit by the fire with me on Tuesday, is to ask some real Fred Rogers kinds of questions. Some questions that invite real response and relationship. And if we do that, Ecclesia, I got to tell you, nobody cares when you die how much money you have. Well, somebody does. You're maybe the people that would inherit it. But nobody's going to be super impressed. But I'll tell you, you know what makes you rich? Having great friends. That's what makes you rich. If you got people you can count on and people that count on you, that's a great life. And it doesn't matter how big your house is. Doesn't matter what car you drive. What matters is that you care for other people and other people care for you. I want to be at our church an incubator for great friendships. And I hope that we can find ways to engage one another in ways that are really meaningful. And what we'll find, like Tim Madigan and Fred Rogers, is that all of a sudden you just sit down together and find out we have so much in common, more in common than we have that's different. And we are going to commit to share life together in a way that celebrates the best times and that I'm not alone in the hardest times. I look around the room today, and there are people in this room that are celebrating some amazing milestones. And there are people in the room today, like my friend Chris, that has cared well for his mom, right? He's been a great, the kind of son you would want to have. As his mom has aged, he's just loved her well. And they're at a crisis in a different place in that journey now, right? And you just go like, we need our friends in that place. And I'm honored. If you knew more stories in this room too, by the way, you'd be blown away by the quality of the people in this room. You would be in awe of the people that you get to sit with. So I want to say a prayer for you as we come to communion. I want to invite you into deeper friendship, deeper relationship, and the life that God made you for. God, I thank you for Fred Rogers. I thank you for presence. I thank you for a willingness and an invitation to really engage one another in a way that has no fluff, that no artificial, that just says we're going to move into the places that really matters. We're going to extend love and kindness and grace in the hard places and the rough edges. And I pray, God, that you would shape this church community to be that kind of place where we can thrive. We'd be at our best when we engage in a real way with the brothers and sisters that you made us to walk with. I pray particularly for men that struggle a little bit more to engage that place, that vulnerability that for many of us, we hear Tim writes a letter and he just says to another man, I just really hope, but I'm afraid that you wouldn't be proud of me. And we think that sounds scary to do. And yet we hear our brothers say, I don't know if I would be here. I don't know if I'd be the same if I hadn't risked vulnerability with a new friend. Lord, would you give us a chance to gather on Tuesday, to gather next week, and to engage in the kind of vulnerability that leads to deep, meaningful, true, honest, authentic relationships. We thank you most of all that as we come to this table, that you call us friend, that you, the one that made us, and you know all of our failures, all of our mistakes, and you call us friend. As we come to communion, we pray, Lord, that as we take it into our mouths, we would be reminded that we are your beloved. We pray all of this together, and we pray it in your name, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit we pray. Amen.